So students, today's lecture will be on Frankenstein's chapter 4, and I think we have had enough background to not have a separate background for this chapter, so we can directly move into talking about the text. So once again, I'll be quoting some sections from the text, and I'll be explaining their significance in the context of the entire novel, right? So just one bit of background information that should suffice is that Victor Frankenstein is at the University of Ingolstadt, where he has met several professors, and there he has finally determined, due to the influence of his professors, that he is going to pursue a certain kind of experimentation. So, in this chapter, we are going to get more detail, right? So the first excerpt here is as follows, as displayed on your screens. I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit and was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that at the end of 2 years I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments, which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. So as you can see, 2 years have passed since he joined the University of Ingolstadt, and in this time he made rapid progress, right? And he has impressed the entire university, right? He has uh, won the great esteem and admiration of the university. So when I had arrived at this point and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depend on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends and my native town when an incident happened that protracted my stay. Right? So we have more information here as to how the novel will proceed from here. So first of all, we know that he has made great improvements and he is admired at the university. And at the end of 2 years, he says that he had gained so much knowledge and so much proficiency in the sciences that he was studying, that there was really no difference between his knowledge and that of the professors who were teaching him there, right? So he made such rapid progress. Some people are actually known to do that. It is nothing surprising, right? You read about Derozio in semester 2. If you remember, Derozio had become a college teacher at the age of 18, right? So there are examples of precocious people who do exceed or who do surpass the expectations of those of their peers, and they actually go above par as compared to their peers. So it's not really very surprising if you try to look at the realism at this point of the story. However, the important lesson that we must take away from here is that Frankenstein, now having acquired so much knowledge and so much depth, he thought that it was not really necessary for him to continue staying at the university. And then he thought of or planned to return back to Switzerland from where he had come. But then an incident happened. So let's see what this incident is. He says, one of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Whence I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? Right? So his question at this point had become that, so from where does life come? Right? What is the source of life? Whence did the principle of life proceed? Is his words. So if you break it down, it's basically, where does life stem from? And he says that his attention was now solely focused on understanding the human frame and any other animal which basically had life. Any living creature, any living animal was now his interest. I revolved these circumstances in my mind and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Okay, so if you remember, natural philosophy is a reference to science, and natural philosophers are what we today know as scientists. Back then, they were called natural philosophers, and those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology basically refers to biology. Basically, it talks about biology or the human anatomy, right? So he's telling us that, okay, I have gained so much knowledge, and now my interests are entirely on living animals. Um, so at the end of this period of stay at the university, Victor Frankenstein had determined that he's going to apply all of this knowledge to biology or physiology, right? So here he takes a turn. If you look at the next two quotations from the text, you will see that he is now talking to someone else, right? Um, Actually, he is not talking to someone else. Rather, he is suddenly becoming aware that he is talking to Robert Walton, right? So he says, "Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true." So now, why is he suddenly conscious of the presence of Robert Walton? Is it that he was not conscious about his presence for so long? Well, Frankenstein was telling his life story, right? And we do not know what expressions or what thoughts Robert Walton had while listening to Frankenstein's story. However, this is where we get an indication that Robert Walton is surprised, is aghast even, perhaps, right? So many adjectives are applicable here, but the point is Frankenstein noted that there was a degree of disbelief, or there was a degree of incredulity in the expression of Robert Walton, the person he's telling his story to. And therefore, he stops telling his story and tells him, "Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. I'm not mad." And he says, "The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true." So he's saying, whatever I have told you and whatever my life story is that I'm telling you is as true as the fact that the sun shines in the heavens, right? So basically, everything that I'm telling you is true. And keep in mind that I'm not a madman who is telling you some fantasy. Everything I'm telling you has actually happened, right? So this is an important juncture where um, he does not speak to someone else, but in some sense he does, because here he finds the expressions of Robert Fulton, the listener, to be a bit of to contain a bit of incredulity to it, and hence he mentions these two important excerpts. Okay, now he continues with his story again. "Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I, I became myself capable of bestowing animation into lifeless matter." So this is a very important paragraph, because here, his here we have indication for the first time that all his knowledge and all his experimentations, everything that he tried to discover, his inclinations towards physiology, have now come to fruition, right? So after days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, he finally discovered the cause of life, and more importantly, he was now capable of bestowing or imbuing life into something that is lifeless, right? So animation is the word used here. When you hear or see the word animation, do not imagine an animation film or an anime. Don't do that. Animation basically means, well, I'll just give you an idea of where this word comes from, right? So animation and anima, animal, all of these words come from the same root, right? So an animal is someone or something that can be animated or that has life, right? The source word anima basically means life, and anything that has life is an animal, right? And anything that looks or appears to have life is animated or an animation. So when you see an animation film, we do know that the objects that you actually see on your screens are lifeless, but then the people who have made the film have animated those, right, or given them life. So animation basically means to give life. Okay, so keep that in mind. An important claim by Frankenstein here is that he has finally discovered the secrets of life. More importantly, he is now able to give life to lifeless matter. Okay, so a few more excerpts from chapter 4 and then we'll be done. He says, Victor Frankenstein says, I see by your I see by your eagerness, and by your eagerness, obviously we are referring to the listener. I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. Okay, so I am Victor Frankenstein here. You here is Robert Walton, and expression in your eyes is obviously the expression of Robert Walton's eyes. Um, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. Now, what is the secret? The secret, obviously, is the secret of giving life to lifeless matter. All right, as we had seen in the previous quotations. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. Okay, so once again, Victor Frankenstein, while telling his story, notices the expressions in the face of Robert Walton, and noting those expressions, it becomes obvious to him that Robert Walton also wants to be acquainted or wants to be informed of the secret of life which Frankenstein had discovered. But then Frankenstein says, no matter how much you want to know it, I can see that you want to know it, know how to give life to lifeless matter, but I cannot tell you that. And if you listen to my entire story, you will easily be able to understand why I don't want to tell it. All right. Next he says, I will not lead you on, unguarded, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your distraction and infallible misery. So he's kind of telling Robert that I'm not going to tell you the secrets of life because if I tell you, your life will also be full of destruction and infallible misery as my life is, right? So there is more to his life story that we are going to know about, but we already have the foreshadowing that Frankenstein's life, after the point that he had discovered the secrets of life, was not particularly pleasant, right? As he confesses here, it was filled with infallible misery, right? Finally, he says, learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, that he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. Very important lesson he's trying to teach Robert Walton here. Remember, Robert Walton, I mentioned in the early classes that Robert Walton is kind of a foreshadowing or a surrogate for Victor Frankenstein, because while Victor Frankenstein had uh, learned the secrets of life and had learned the craft of bestowing life on upon lifeless matter, Robert Walton is also trying to do something perhaps not similar, but perhaps equal in magnitude, right? Because remember, Robert Walton is venturing into the Arctic Sea. He's trying to discover lands that no one has seen before, right? And this is the early 18th century or late 18th century or early 19th century we are talking about, when exploration was, when there were tons and tons of explorers. Captain James Cook had discovered Australia several decades earlier, and that's when the first Australian colonies were being set up. Only a few hundred years ago, they had discovered the route to India. They had also discovered the routes to South America. So there was this belief that there are still undiscovered lands which the Europeans badly wanted to find and perhaps colonize. Who knows that? The important thing, however, is that Robert Walton was also trying to do something that no one else had done before, trying to go to places where no one had gone before and discover new land. Now, Frankenstein says, you are doing something which is very similar to I have done. Now, and I have suffered. And if you continue to do what you are doing now, you are going to suffer too. Therefore, learn from me, right? Uh, if you do not learn from what I am saying, at least listen to my example and draw the right deductions for yourself. What lesson? The lesson that it is very dangerous acquirement of knowledge is very dangerous, and a person who prefers to live in his hometown and believes that that town is his entire world, right, is much happier than the person who tries to know everything, like Victor Frankenstein or Robert Walton, right? So one more quote here that I think very is of great importance is this one. I began the creation of a human being, right? So his learnings have come to fruition. He has discovered some of the most important things, and finally he is in the process of creating a creature, a human being, right? I began the creation of a human being as the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed. I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature, that is to say, about 8 feet in height and proportionably large. After having formed this determination and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. So in chapter 4, uh, we see that Frankenstein has not only discovered the secrets of life, he has also learned how to bestow that life into an inanimate object. But finally, as his own project, he is now trying to create this, or we can try to see it from a different perspective as well. We can say that he's actually trying to give birth, or he's kind of trying to produce life, right? So, one of the important distinctions, one of the important thematic elements of the text as well is the difference between giving birth and producing, right? So, birth through the natural process, and then birth by the means of production. In this case, it is obviously production because Frankenstein creates life on his in his lab, and it's more like a factory or an industrial setting than a hospital setting or a home setting where a normal child is born, or a child is born in a normal way. So let's now look at a few more quotes, and then we can end chapter 4. My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with the remembrance, but then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. Okay? Now he's saying that after so many days or so many months or years of having created this creature, my limbs now tremble when I think of those things. However, at that time I was very restless and I just wanted to move forward and complete this experiment. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as, the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate, I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from charnel houses and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all the other apartments by a gallery and staircase, I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from the sockets in attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased, I brought my work near to a conclusion. So here he's telling you to what extents he went just to complete this experiment of his, right? So he separated his laboratory from the rest of the house, right? And more importantly, he collected bones for his experiment from charnel houses or morgues, right, as we call them. And then he he kind of did those things that were done during the Renaissance, when the first discoveries were being made about the human anatomy, right? So he was essentially doing things that grave diggers did, right? So he was collecting bones, flesh, etc., etc., all the material that he needed, right? And at times he did loathe his own occupation, right? But his eagerness never ceased to exist, and then he finally brought his work near to a conclusion. So chapter 4 is the relevance of chapter 4 is that it gives you all the details um, that are necessary for us to know before the experimentation is successful, before the creature is finally created. So we know that whatever he has learned in the university has come to fruition, and in the end we also know that his experimentation or his lab is completely ready. He has gone to great extents to fulfill this experimentation, and more importantly he is prepared to bestow life into inanimate matter. So this is the importance of chapter 4, very significant among the early chapters. As you know, I'm already skipping chapters that I think do not require separate lectures on them, right? Obviously, not all chapters require lectures, but this is one of the ones that not only requires a lecture but is of great significance. Now, the chapters that I don't lecture on separately, you will definitely have to read them, but obviously, you will realize if you read the novel itself that those chapters mostly contain um, mostly contain the narrative, right? And so I'm my concern at this point is more on the themes than with the narrative itself, right? Because narrative, you can always go forward and read the novel. So I'll go and talk about chapter 5 next. But for today's lecture, we'll end here.